Welcome everyone to another episode of the PMA podcast. As always, Landon Blackwell here with the incredible Ben Blaschke, Managing Director of Poker Media Australia. Ben, great to have your company once again.
Thanks, Landon. It's nice to see the country starting to open up again, slowly, bit by bit. They're starting to get a little sense of normality creeping back in.
We were just talking off air before we started that you've managed to get yourself out for dinner with the better half. Is that right?
Oh, no, just had lunch out at a restaurant yesterday, which was like a novel experience. Haven't done that for, I think it was 10 weeks exactly since I last did that. So, the little pleasures that we miss out on, you really enjoy them these days, given what's happened the past few months.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ben, you are truly blessed because obviously here in Victoria, in comparison to yourselves in New South Wales and other parts of the country, things are slower to pick up, as it were. But I'm particularly interested in speaking about the reopening of a business here with this next guest. Of course, you may know him, of course, from the Crown days when he was tournament director and also from Poker News, the legendary Jonno Pittock. Jonno, great to have you on board, mate.
Thanks, mate. Legendary is a bit of a rap, so I'll try and live up to that. I don't know if that counts, but look, thanks for having me. I guess, in terms of reopening the business I'm in now reopened today, actually. So a little bit of a different spin in my life now than, I guess, when we used to work together in the poker media days many moons ago. So life's certainly different. Certainly different now than it was 3 months ago, but also different now for me than it was, when was I last in the poker? Well, probably, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. Poker played a huge part in my life. I've sort of been out of it for a bit of a time. So I'm looking forward to this chat too, mate.
Absolutely. Well, let's just talk about the business space that you're in now, because just looking at the background here, it's just a far cry from the hallowed halls of the Crown Poker Room from way back when.
Well, what my office used to be in the basement of the basement.
Absolutely. Look, just tell us, obviously you're heavily into Chinese medicine. You've studied it for many years. Tell us, how did you manage to get about into this line of work?
I started studying this degree in Chinese medicine straight out of high school in 1998. So, working at the casino for me was a bit of a detour. I took what was supposed to be a year off school to find myself, I guess, at 19, 20 years old, and ended up working in hospitality and ended up working at the casino. I found my way there because I always loved the casino environment. Growing up, my favourite movies were, Casino and Goodfellas and all that, and Rounders, obviously. And then, getting into the casino business as a dealer, I just thought, it's something to do for a year, earn a bit of money and have some fun and whatever. And had no plans on making a career of it at all. Since I was 16, I wanted to be a doctor of Chinese medicine, and I grew up doing a bunch of martial arts. So that's, to answer your question, that's how I originally got into it. One of my teachers was an acupuncturist by trade and a sort of part-time herbalist. So he'd beat us up during the day and then fix everyone up at night, So that was always interesting to me. He'd get out the cups and he'd do the flame cupping and acupuncture. And, guys that couldn't move their shoulder after a full day of practice all of a sudden could. And I thought it was pretty magical. Enter the Dragon was my favourite movie as a kid. So all that sort of Chinese mythology was something that I'd always been interested in. And then got sidetracked with a pretty long career in the casino business. I was studying while I was at Crown as well, up until about 2005, 6. I think I stopped studying around there, pretty much once I started to get promoted. And then, obviously the industry boomed and I was in the right place at the right time and sort of rode that wave and made a choice around that time, around 2005, 6, to concentrate on my career at the casino and stopped studying. So I'd been studying part-time for about 5 or 6 years, and it sort of progressed towards the last part of the degree where you've got to do a lot of clinical placement and all that sort of stuff, which I just didn't have time for back then. So, and then, the rest is history in terms of my poker career. And then, through my illness, I sort of was given a chance to reevaluate my life and figure out where I was at the time, what I wanted to be doing. And it's kind of like, I have a theory that the universe sort of gives you what you need when you need it, not necessarily what you want. So, it gave me the illness in terms of being able to go, hang on a minute, this life you live in here probably isn't your path. You had your fun. Let's get back on the path, So I re-enrolled to study and lost a lot of credits because it had been more than 10 years since I'd studied some of the subjects. So I had to go back and start some of it again. and do all that. I was fortunate enough that I'd picked up some certification to practice in the early part of the 2000s. So I could do cupping and what we call Tui Na, or Chinese massage. And then slowly I started adding in the acupuncture subjects, and I could needle people and all that. So I'd sort of gone back, and then I made the decision before I returned to work, actually after the transplant, I'd made the decision to go back into study. So I did. I had the transplant at the end of 2011. At the start of 2012, I started, studying back at the degree. So I missed the Aussie Millions that year. It was the only one I missed while I was working there. But and then slowly, so over the last sort of, 7 or 8 years, I'd been finishing that. And at the end of 2018, I finally graduated. So, it took me 3 universities, the better part of 20 years and whatever, to finally become, Doctor of Chinese Medicine and certified and all that and registered. But I wouldn't have done it any other way. Like, if I could change it, I wouldn't. I think it's probably, I'm a better doctor now than I would have been with, 10 or 15 years of clinical practice under my belt, just because of the life experience I got and the time that I had to sit with the medicine. It's one of those things where it's a completely different framework to work from. So for me, what it's given me is a way to understand the way the world works. And so I see, Chinese medicine, I see that in everything I look at. It's the lens that I experience the world through. So, and it always kind of was, even poker, to an extent.
John, I don't know how much you want to talk about your illness for those that don't know. I don't know. But so just talking about what happened there, and do you think you would have gone into the medicine field if that had not happened at that time? Or?
I was born with a renal and a kidney condition. It's called Iga Nephropathy. So immunoglobulin A, it's like it's an antigen. It's sort of like anyway, we'll get too much into the medical side of it, but basically kidney disease. So anytime you hear the word nephropathy, it means, pathology of your kidneys. Yeah, I was diagnosed with that quite young. They sort of said, it's something you'll live with. Don't really worry about it. It's not going to affect your life. Well, it kind of did in the end. So they say you lose sort of 50% of your kidney function over the course of 20 years and then the last 50% in 6 months, which is pretty much what happened to me. So, your kidneys and your heart sort of work together to moderate your blood pressure, right? So what happened with me, I had a fairly high stress job in my 20s, as you guys would know, working in a suit and walking around, you got hundreds of poker players all calling out your name, wanting something from you, and all these staff that need attention. And plus you're eating at Nobu and living on Red Bull and nicotine and all these things. So it wasn't a conduit lifestyle for what I wanted to be. Yeah. So anyway, long story short, went into renal failure at about 30. So I came back from a trip to Vegas. I was working over there and I got a fairly severe edema in my legs, some swelling. And then when I come back, I thought I had DVT or something. So I took myself down to emergency and they re-diagnosed it. Then I'd basically sort of forgotten about it. It was one of those things that I just lived with. Well, it didn't really affect my life. And then it started to. And then my blood pressure was out of control and they couldn't manage that. And then I just, like I said, I went sort of downhill over a period of a couple of years. So I spent about 2 years on dialysis, in and out of intensive care and lots of trips in and out of the hospital and all that. And I ended up receiving a transplant from my father at the end of 2011. So I was fortunate enough that I had a family member that could donate. There was many, many people on the dialysis ward that didn't. So I'll be forever grateful for that. And look, to answer the second part of your question, I think, yes, I would have got into the medicine eventually because I saw myself as this, never saw it as a career path. I saw it as a vocation. If that makes sense. I sort of saw myself as that healer archetype, wanting to help people. I was always that person anyway. That was always in me. So I just lucky enough that at a young age, I found this field that I wanted to work in. And, the glitz and the glam and the casino sort of sucked me in for a bit, drained all the life out of my kidneys, standing on your feet and all these things. The things that Chinese medicine knows, and I knew at the time in the back of my mind, but in your late 20s, you kind of don't really focus on when you're in the moment and you're earning good money and you get to travel the world and you're in an exciting role, So, I think I probably would have come back to the medicine at some point in time. But look, there was a whole bunch of sort of perfect storms that happened around when I left the casino that made the path out quite easy. Yeah, there was like I said, all signs. And once I'd made the choice, I was out within a week, which was really unheard of.
Just as a side note, you were actually in a position at one stage where you actually left Crown, joined the poker media game officially with Poker News, and then came back in a second time, which to be re-employed by the same casino is practically unheard of. Could we perhaps talk a little bit more about how you managed to get involved with that?
I feel like it's a scene from, The Godfather, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in, like I left twice and came back, mate, so
wow.
The third time I handed in my resignation was the last time. Around Yeah, 2006, ended midway after the World Series, 2000. I got married in Vegas that year in 2006, and then came back and was working under Danny. So Danny and I were basically running the poker room. There was no poker room manager or anything at that stage. He was the tournament director and had been for a period of time. And then it was getting too busy for him. He needed an assistant. They put up an application and I applied and went through the interview process and was fortunate enough to get it, right? So, and I leapfrogged a lot of people that had been in the game a lot longer than me. It's not how you get to the dance, it's what you do when you're there, right? So I sort of hit the ground running and loved the role, and Danny and I were working really well together. And then I was doing a bit on the side, just some work on the side with Gareth Edwards, and we were doing some affiliate marketing, and I was marketing to the dealers and all that sort of stuff. So I'd already sort of had my hand in, and I was kind of managing Poker Network at the time from a Crown point of view. Crown was the major sponsor, and we'd have to post content and all that back when you had to know HTML and all that. Yeah, so I'd already sort of had my hand in it, and then an opportunity came up for Poker News. Gaz and I had been talking about it, and then he sent me a link to a job application. So I texted him back, said, "Did you want me to apply for that, mate?" Anyway, so I applied for the role, got the role, spent a year and a bit with Poker News. So we negotiated that first WSOP contract. Bluff had it the year before, 2 years before. And then, I'll never forget sitting in a room with Tony G and Damon and Gaz, the four of us. And we had John Caldwell on a Skype call with us, trying to work out whether or not we should even do that 2007 WSOP. Anyway, we convinced Tony that it would be the best long-term thing because it was a short-term loss. It was an investment that we'd have to put into the company back then. And it wasn't guaranteed to pay returns. All Tony gave a shit about was the ROI, right? So we had to try and convince him that you weren't going to see it in the next 12, 6, 18 months. You're going to see it now. And then hopped on a plane and spent 3 or 4 months living in Vegas, building the team and doing all that, and had to run that. So that's interesting. Trying to manage a team of 62, I think we started with. Americans that we found on Craigslist of all places,
Yeah.
We didn't end with 62. I fired a few of them, but yeah, so that was fun. Yeah. So I was in the poker media, and then Crown ended up calling me and asking me to come back. The room had sort of been run into a bit of disarray while I was gone, and Danny had moved on as well. Yeah. And so didn't really have a captain of the ship, so 2008 was the first Aussie Millions I did back, and I came back in 1st of December. I started, and the Aussie Millions started on the 10th or 12th of January or something. So I had about 6 weeks up my sleeve to try and get players there. Basically, it was what it was. I VIP player acquisition. I said, "Oh, who's coming? Show me the list." And when we asked Danny, nice spreadsheet used to look like, okay, this is the name, this is the date we contacted them, this is how we contacted them, this is what they said, we're going to retouch base on this date. It was a whole flow chart, and they had a list of names of. I said, "Was anyone contacted these people?" Like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, let's start with Phil. Yeah, and then we sort of just went down the list. But in that 2008 Aussie Millions was great. And, I loved my time at Crown. I will never, ever say a bad word about my time there because they were really good to me in many ways. And, I was very fortunate to be promoted like I was. I worked my ass off. And, I like to think I was fairly good at what I did in that role. But yeah, they took their pound of flesh, but I got mine. So it was a very balanced relationship. And in that time, Danny had gone to Macau. He was with PokerStars. They were opening the room there, and they needed a room manager. And he said, him and Jeffrey Huss were managing the stuff for PokerStars at the time. And they said, "Would you be interested in coming over here?" So I jumped on a plane, went to Macau and sorted it all out. I said, "Okay, let's do it." And then, it's so much so that we'd had apartments, and my wife and I gone over there with our 6-month-old kid and looked at schools and everything, and we were ready to go. So I handed in my notice and said, "Okay, thanks for the 6 months. It's been great." And in that 6 months, mind you, I changed a lot of the game spreads and just the way the business was functioning so that it was basically not a set and forget, but everything was there. So it's all right. It's been good. I've been good. I'm out. I'm going to Macau and doing that. And then my boss at the time, as the EGM of table games, said, "Look, just give me the weekend to sort it out." I don't think they were expecting me to opt out. And then came back with a counter offer to keep me on the Monday, which was basically the same as the offer to go to Macau. So it made it one of those things where we're going to Macau, yes, for the opportunity, but more so for the money, right? Because, good money and a lower tax rate, and it would have been it was a short-term plan. We were going to stay there for 3 to 5 years, bank some money, come back to Australia and pay off our mortgage, right? In that same offer came an offer of a senior management path within the casino. So they started putting me through all these different developmental programs over the next couple of years and putting me in different meetings and across the whole casino. So it was basically taking all the things that we're doing in poker and applying it to the rest of the casino, which seems like it would be a good job for a casino head, but for me it was the opposite of that, because it was that was when this doesn't sit well with me. I need to get back on my path, because I never thought anything negative about poker, because it was a peer-to-peer game. Right? The way I saw it was these players were playing against themselves, and we were running the game, making sure it was secure for them, and the rules were upheld, and there was integrity. And for that, they paid us a fee. And I felt like that was a very, very good energy exchange. And I didn't want to be in a more combative environment where I was now trying to come up with campaigns and strategies to manipulate people to stay on the tables longer and lose to a house edge game. So I would want to keep players on the poker table longer. I mean, that's part of your player retention strategy, right? So, for all the poker business people, player acquisition, player retention. And that's it. That's it in a nutshell, right? So then you've got all these different strategies and tools to acquire players, right? And then all these other strategies and tools to maintain and keep them. Yeah. So, yeah, they wanted me to do that for table games, and I left.
Jonno, I'm just quite interested to find out what the life of a TD is like in the lead up to and during something like the Aussie Millions. I mean,
sure.
I know how demanding players can be, and you've got thousands of them all wanting something, from reasonable requests to completely outlandish requests. But then you've got to deal with structures and your staff. And I mean, run us through what an event like the Aussie Millions is like for you.
So it depends on which level, because I did the Aussie Millions from all levels, right? So I mean, the first 10K Aussie Millions was in 2003. I dealt the final table. And I'd only been on the floor a few months at that stage. I was just persistent, mate. Like, I was just a nagger. I'd go, put me on the table. I want to deal that final table. What do I got to do? Can you just watch me? I'm on this table here. Just look at my flops. I'm clean. I can do it. Look at my cards. All this shit, right? So I was just in it. Right? From day one. So my first shift dealing roulette was my first game. And my first shift was in the Las Vegas room, dealing $2 roulette. And I could hear, George P, 4-8 Hold'em, Frank Z, $2 Manila, Carleen on the microphone. And, it's like, fucking, what's that game? So, and my supervisor goes, that's poker. I said, poker? I played poker as a kid with matchsticks, draw poker. So I'll go and have a look. That's not poker. What the fuck is that? I kept watching, and then just the way they were, and they all had cool names like Billy the Croc and Coffee Billy and all these different nicknames they had, Of course, there'd be old card player magazines laying around, so I'd pick up them. And I had no mates at that stage because I'd only just moved down from the bush to live in the city and work at the casino. So I was just spending all my time, all my breaks, I was spent down in the poker room just sitting. Like I used to sit behind Joe Hasham and Dujan Stojevski, right? So they used to sit and play on table 3 the old dealer's choice game, right? So this was a $5 blind half pot limit game, right? So it was either Hold'em, Omaha, High Low. Sometimes they play stud, right? But mostly it was just those 3. Anyway, so it's all these old timers, and 2 young guys, nice looking clothes and whatever. And I'd sit behind them because they were younger. And as it turns out, it would end up being Joe and Douche, right? So, but yeah, and that was before I was even a dealer, right? So I'm getting off topic, mate. But to answer your question, so as a dealer coming into, I remember particularly those first Aussie Millions, you got to understand, that first Aussie Millions had, God, I used to be able to rattle these numbers off the top of my head. I'm going to butcher them, but it was 120 something. I think it was 122. Then the next year we went to 133 maybe in 2004. And then 2005 when Jamil Dia won, it was $1 million guarantee for first. So he won $1 million and there was 263 players in that field. What you got to understand about the poker room is it has a real, well, as you guys would definitely know, but for those that have never walked into one, it has a vibration about it, right? So when you walk in, it starts with all the chips, but it just has this hum, yeah? And it just goes along. Now, when the major championships come around, that vibration goes like that. It's like, and then when certain people come in, that goes, it's chaotic, right? So you kind of feed off that, yeah? But that energy is very depleting. When you're a dealer, that's what you want to be dealing. You want to be dealing the biggest game in the room with the most pressure and the best players, right? What you got to understand, in the early days, we knew everybody, every single player that came in, right? And they knew us, right? They're there all the time, yeah? So to the point where, like Aussie Yildiz and I, we ran a Learn to Play program up on the main gaming floor trying to pull players in because they were going to close the poker room, right? There was no tables and they wanted the floor space for other games and all this sort of rubbish, right? So thankfully things turned around and whatever else. And then we were able to, I say we rode the wave, but we also steered it a little bit too, the advantage of me being put into that role and then falling into it as a senior manager's role, I was in my late 20s, right? So I had a lot of energy. I was into the game, and I knew what the new school of players wanted. And I also understood the old school players, because I would deal games to the old school players every day. I would play online with the new school players every night, right? So I kind of knew what was going on with the industry. So
Sorry, John, we should also mention that this is right around the period too, wasn't it? When, I mean, Joe won the World Series in 2005. So you had a front row seat to, as you said, the old school previous, and then the real boom in Australia, as you saw the changing face over that time. So, I mean, so you had a front row seat to all of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was in the passenger seat for a lot of it, and then I jumped in the driver's seat. So that was funny. I was talking to Lynn Gilmartin yesterday, and we were talking about this, and everyone equates the boom in poker in Australia to Joe winning the World Series in 2005, right? And yes, that did massive things, right? Like more than anything. But it wasn't the first sort of wave. The first wave really was when the WPT started airing on free-to-air TV and Channel 10 after the footy on a Saturday night, right? So at 10:30, the broadcast would start. At 10:35, 10:40, the phone would ring. Oh, you got that Texas poker game I see on TV, mate? With the 2 cards and all the ones in the middle? Yeah, mate. Yeah, no worries. Come on down. So people would just walk in. And then because of that exposure, the game just started booming, right? So, I mean, you'll see it in the Aussie Millions numbers. We went from between 2004 Aussie Millions, I want to say it was 133, and then we went to 263. So that sort of groundswell was happening, and then Joe won, and it just went bang, right? So, and then that night, I'll never forget that. Like that was a Saturday night in Australia, and it was about 11 p.m., right? And I've told this story at different events and whatever, and I still get goosebumps when I think about it, right? Because you got to understand, back then we couldn't supply demand, right? We had 26, 27 tables left over from that Aussie Millions. So basically they bumped the tables in, and they were supposed to take them out, but they didn't because of whatever reason. And like there was some hold up. They were supposed to come and get them, and they never did. And they had to work because, as a manager there, you get emails saying when works are scheduled and all this sort of shit because security has to be notified and whatever. They didn't come to pick up the tables, so we just put games on them, right? And then the game stayed. So all of a sudden this extra revenue's there, and they're like, well, maybe we'll just leave those tables there. We're only going to put some bullshit winner card display or something anyway, right? So they just left the active tables there. And so by the time July comes around and Joe's over in Vegas, our games are pumping. So on a Saturday night, the poker room's pumping. There's 26, 27 tables. I think it was 27 at the time. All full. Waiting lists are full. The bar's full. The rail's full. The room's full, right, of people wanting to get into poker, yeah? And Elvis is still playing up in the Las Vegas room. And there's just this crazy atmosphere, right? And, you're on the microphone trying to get the players' attention so you can fill this seat on the game. And you're like, Frankie! Frank! It's that kind of vibe, right? Anyway, so I'm in and out of the office all afternoon because all week we'd been following it, obviously, on Card Player back then. And, hitting refresh. There's no live feeds. Refresh. Oh, he won a hand. Going, oh, Joe Hasham's just doubled up and da-da-da. Like we just kept giving the running the whole week. And especially when it got down the last couple of tables. And then that final table, and when he won, like I said, it was like 11 p.m., the room's full. Elvis has just gone on a break, right? And I said, ladies and gentlemen, fresh in from Las Vegas, we've got some news. We have a new world champion. His name is Joe Hasham from Melbourne. And the place went fucking nuts. It was unbelievable. People were I can see it now. Like people are sitting on the rails, they're hugging it's like they won. Like it was like we won. You know what I mean? And even like that night, I remember driving home and I'm talking to Frank on the phone and I'm like, Frankie, can you believe it, mate? We won. And he goes, oh, yeah. And he goes, hang on, well, Joe won, but it feels like we won. Like, it was that whole thing, And then, so the next morning I was scheduled to run a Sunday, whatever tournament. And I got a phone call from the poker room saying, oh, the news is here. This is like 9 a.m. The tournament doesn't start till 12, right? I said, oh, shit. They go, they want to come back and do a piece when you're starting the tournament, talk about Joe. I said, oh, okay. So then I find my best suit, my best tie, do all that sort of rubbish. And yeah, so that was just chaos. And then from there, it was just the media exposure. It was just, so what that brought in was increased budget particularly for the Aussie Millions. The Aussie Millions was the marquee product, right? So, and in the casino for January, that was it. So it was a casino-wide promotion now, as opposed to just a poker-specific promotion. So that that internal move at the casino meant that it opened up some floodgates for funding for different things that we wanted to do. So now all of a sudden, if I want to do a nice glossy brochure for a new idea for a poker, like the Melbourne Poker Championships, you know, we should do one of these on a smaller scale for the locals. Yeah, what events would you run? So it was exciting for us back then as tournament directors, because we sort of looked at and we talked to the players, like we knew them. So we go out there and go, boys, we're thinking of putting a start high-low on the Melbourne Champs schedule. You know, what do you reckon? Oh, yeah, what price range? I don't know, you reckon 550? Oh, who's coming from Sydney? Oh, yeah, I spoke to this guy. So it was just, that was how we ran it. Like, we ran it in conjunction with the players almost, you know. But still from a level of, we are the integrity of the game, yeah, because, you know, obviously players have their own motives and whatever. Sorry, mate, I haven't answered your question. So that's the dealer side of it. Lots of energy in the room. Supervisors, same sort of thing. So supervisors, it's chaos, right? Because you've got to get the players into the seats. Yeah, the dealers can't do that. All they're calling is 1 on 7, right? So now you've got to make sure this guy gets into that game. You've got to talk to Danny or whoever's running the tournament, trying to figure out, when's that table breaking? I need to put this cash game on there. So you'll see it. You'll see these conversations that are happening all the time. Now, it plugged into my analytical way of thinking. I just saw it and I worked the list. I was fortunate enough to work the list, the cash game seating list, and also that single table satellite seating list. So I understood the way the room worked. And then, so I got promoted, like I said, it was right before that actually, because I must have got promoted between the 2004 Aussie Millions and the 2005 Aussie Millions. And so it must have been there maybe February, March that year that I started to go into that sort of, well, 2IC role really back then. Not that I knew that. I wasn't even going to apply. My wife said, just apply. You love poker, you know. Glad I did in the end. So fast forward to when I'm director of poker, right? And now I'm responsible for everything. So I'm responsible for the budget, like figuring out where to spend the money and how to earn it, because that's what a budget is, right? So it would be a medium-sized business outside of the casino, let alone inside the casino's portfolio. And look, when I started as a dealer, we had 12 tables. And when I left, I think there was 72 or 73 that were on the floor. So if you think about something like the Aussie Millions, you're planning the Aussie Millions as the Aussie Millions is running, right? So you're planning the next year. Okay, you're working out what works, what the players didn't like. And all year, you're keeping an eye on trends worldwide and all that sort of stuff, right? So don't forget, Crown Poker was the first one to do the reprecharge tournaments, right? We're allowing players what they call now re-entry tourneys. That was unheard of when we did that. And that discussion came out of a conversation with Fox, where Fox used to film the Aussie Millions, and they said to me, hey, Jonno, Phil Ivey's busted, man. Can he buy back in? Like, he's really good for television. Like, how do we get him back in the tournament? I'm like, you can't buy in, mate. It's a freeze out. It's not a rebuy. What are you talking about? And I wrote it off, right? I was like, you can't do that. And then I was like, why not? Why can't you? Like, let's say, what if you did a re-entry? You could have one re-entry, and we limited it. Yeah, but that would advantage the people that had more money. All right, well, what if we did multiple day one flights, and it was only the losers out of this day one flight that could re-enter, or whatever. And we just brainstormed it. And then that was what we, to be honest, that's what we used the Melbourne Champs and the Vic Champs and the Joe Hasham Deep Stack Series and all these smaller events. We used them as proving grounds for tournament concepts and marketing ideas and all that sort of stuff, or, you know, live streaming. We did everything, like whatever was around. That's what we sort of tried to do. So back to figuring out the Aussie Millions, you've got to work out everything from what tournaments on what day, how many dealers you're going to need for that day. And I got pretty specific. Like, it wasn't a situation where, well, there was other situations where you just give what was called scheduling or workforce planning back then. You give them a list. Okay, at 12 o'clock, I need an extra 20 tables open for this tournament that might get, you know, somewhere between 180 and 280 players, right? And then these dealers come in, some of them call sick. That's their job to figure that out. I got so specific that I'd say, okay, I need 72 tables at this time, but I want these specific dealers, yeah? Because I came up as a dealer, I knew what it was. So, or I need X amount of supervisors and tournament staff and whatever. I need these specific heads, yeah? And you got to figure out who you can put in swings with each other, who gets along, who doesn't. So there's all of that in terms of staffing. Then you've got the player needs. So from the top down, thankfully, as time went by, I managed to build a team of people that I trusted that could do some of that stuff for me. This includes VIP player acquisition, right? So this is, you know, emailing Patrick Antonius and saying, hey, mate, you know, you're coming to Aussie Millions and this is what we can offer you and whatever. And then getting in touch with the drivers, making sure they're getting picked up. So your phone's just ringing non-stop all the time, right? So anyone that sees Jack Effel on the floor of the world, where's Jack? Call Jack. He's not there, mate, because he's not the tournament director, even though that's his title. It's not befitting the role that he does, right? And the Aussie Millions is that on a smaller scale. So I can't imagine what Jack has to go through. And Savage was the same. Like, you watch Savage's tournaments, he's across all of it as well, right? So, you know, and these were the guys, like, not Jack Effel back then, because he came in later, but particularly Matt Savage. Like, he'd come over in the early days with Fox as a consultant. And he was really good, right? Because you got to understand, this guy ran the World Series of Poker so he was doing for the World Series down in Binions what we were doing for Crown at Crown, when, like, he had tables out in the hallways and all of that aside. So what you're doing is everything. So when you're coming into the room, but you're being pulled in all different directions, right? Because, you know, you might have to stop and talk to security because they asked Phil Ivey for ID yesterday when he was walking in with a pizza. This is a true story, right?
Yeah,
he's walking in with a pizza from the food court and they go, "Hey man, have you got ID?" And he goes, "What?" He goes, "You got ID?" His face is on a billboard for the Aussie Millions right behind him. Yeah. He goes, like, so you might have to stop and talk to security about that, right? Then, you know, you're walking in, there could be any number of unknown issues, right? Which is what I loved. So for me, like, I like when I got multiple things on the go, and I like troubleshooting stuff, right? I like looking in advance and trying to set things up so that nothing happens. But then I also like troubleshooting things when they do, right? So it's just non-stop chaos. So for me, the Aussie Millions, I would check in. I would literally check into the casino. So I would go and stay either in the Towers or the Promenade or Metropole when it opened, always. And you're at the bottom of the list, mate. So they'd be moving your room. Like, so I'd go up to my room some nights, tired after an 18-hour shift. I know I'm only getting about 3 or 4 hours sleep. You know, door doesn't work. What's going on? I go down. "Oh, we had to move your rooms." You know, "Oh, which room am I in tonight? I just want to go to bed." You know what I mean? So there's all of that. You know, it seems like, "Oh, you got to stay at the Crown Towers for 3 weeks. Oh, that must have been great." It was great for my wife and my kids when they came along. Like, they come and swim in the pools and get room service and go walking in the sea. I was never there. I was always working, right? So Everybody's got needs. Yeah. So the staff have got needs. Your bosses have got needs. The players mostly have got needs, you know, because when you're managing the players, you're their go-to guy, right? And then not only the players, but all the partners. So, you know, you think about your PokerStars representative and your 888 Poker representative, or your whoever it is that's there, or, you know, you've got a pub poker guy from far north Queensland that's sent you 12 players, you know. So you've got to look after this guy. 12 players is nothing to sneeze at, right? He spent his whole year giving 1 seat a month away and worked his ass off for you. Like, you got to take that guy out for dinner at some point, you know what I mean? But there's only so many dinners and all that you can do, and you've still got to run the tournaments and all that sort of stuff. So I get a bit jazzed up talking about it because I remember what the pace of my life was like back then, right? Which is probably why I lost a kidney doing it.
I feel like we could sit here and do a 4-hour podcast with you easily, Jonno. But
this will have to be a 2-parter.
Yeah, I feel like. So I do want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now before we finish the podcast. But just quickly, when you talk about, I mean, as you say, you got the Crown Poker Room to be, you know, the poker room in Australia. Of course, more recently we've seen, you know, the Stars put a lot of effort into their poker room in Sydney. That they've moved to about 15 different locations before they got there, but they're finally there.
And they may move again.
Yeah, who knows? But, you know, they've finally got a pretty good location there. So what we've seen basically is, you know, the rest of Australia start to go, "Oh, we want to do that." I mean, do you look around and say, "Hey, are you happy with the state of Australian poker other than right now?" But in general, you know, are you proud that you sort of played a big part in laying the foundation for that?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like, I mean, yes, I'm absolutely proud, but like I said, I take no ownership of any of it because, I mean, we had a great team. We were in it. We did it well, I think, but I couldn't have done it any better. I gave it everything I had while I was in it, right? So I'm very happy and proud, and, you know, I look back, but it's not something I talk about, right? Like, I went to a party, one of my best mates I grew up with, and his older brother was there, right? Massive poker head, right? And he goes, "Oh, Jonno, man, you know, I was watching 1HD or whatever it was, whatever that year of the Aussie Millions. I commentated a year, right? And he goes, "Oh, and I heard your voice." He goes, "Oh, man." And all he wanted to do was talk about poker. And it was just, I couldn't imagine it. I tried to get away from that conversation as much as possible. In the end, I said, "Look, man, let's talk about something else. I don't want to talk about it." Like, and he goes, "Yeah, but why wouldn't you?" He goes, and he's even saying to me, like, "Oh, you were the man there." Like, you know, and I'm like, "Yeah, but not that I'm ashamed of it." Like, because like I said, I gave everything to it. I loved the game of poker, right? That's the thing. Back then I was kind of attached to that role, right? And anyone that worked under me will probably tell you that, like, "Oh, he's a bit of an arsehole sometimes," right? Others will tell you I was fun or whatever, but I'm sure there'd be particularly dealers because I didn't really tolerate shit from them, you know? So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure I was an arsehole back then, you know, just because of the pressure that you're under, right? So it just wasn't conducive for who I wanted to be. Yeah.
It's quite obvious that you're so passionate about poker, Jonno, and there is a core philosophy, I think, that you've touched on so many times throughout this podcast, talking about being in it for the long haul in terms of player acquisition, player retention, you know, and just being really committed to it. That has to be the absolute key to managing a successful poker room, because I certainly find from experience that if you don't invest that time and effort into looking after your players and looking after your staff, then, you know, whatever poker room or league that it is that you're running just tends to fall apart at the seams very quickly. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. But what it is, it's about trying to, I had the unique ability, I think, this is, you know, if I want to blow my own trumpet, of being able to transcribe what I knew from intuitively being in the poker room all the time. Because don't forget, I was doing that much overtime and whatever, just trying to earn money and stay in the poker room, right? So it's about having the right language. So when you talk about keeping your staff happy, what you're talking about there is player retention, because the happier your staff are, the better the experience they're going to give this player, the better that player has a chance of coming back. So you retain that player, right? You might retain him on that night. Yeah. So this is also the thing you think about when you want to upgrade upholstery and chairs. When you're thinking about capital investment, you go, okay, what am I doing this for? Just to make it look good? These chairs are okay. What's wrong with them? They're uncomfortable. The players don't like them. After 3 hours, their bum gets numb and they want to leave, right? So we need to get more comfy chairs. I just give them some cushions. So we tried that. You know, then the cushions get flat after a few years, right? So if you're going to upgrade the cushions, how much extra to upgrade the chairs? They're the things you're thinking about. So yes, in terms of running a successful poker room, and this is the same thing online as it is offline. I've run online poker rooms as well, right? So it's no different. So in terms of comfort on an online poker room, you're talking about the software and how like visually aesthetic it is and how easy it is to navigate. How easy is it to have 8 windows open? You know, all that sort of stuff. Are they resized? Like all these sort of, that comes down to player comfort and retention in those circles. So you're having the same conversation. Like I said, there's only the two fundamentals. It's acquisition and retention. That is it. You know, from day dot, you know, who was it? Was it Jack? Is it Jack Binton? I mean, he was the first one to really understand it, right? From a casino operator's point of view, right? Because he was also a sick gambler, but he was a casino operator, right? So look, when you said that, I had an idea of something I want to say, right? So the biggest unsung hero in Australian poker, in my belief, is Joel Williams, right? Now, that guy is the current TD at Crown. He is under more pressure than any of us ever were, right, in today's current climate. Well, not particularly today, but I'm thinking about the last couple of Aussie Millions. They've broke record numbers for the Aussie Millions main event right now. What you got to understand is what that actually means right now, because that's why I say, like, yes, I'm proud of what I achieved there, but I was riding a fairly big wave at the time. What Joel's had to do is come up with ways to keep this wave going, right? Now, you're talking about more seats than ever getting generated inside the poker room all year, right? Now, that takes effort. That's a grind. I mean, he deserves way more credit than anyone, really. Like, to keep that the way that is in this environment.
Would it be because Joel has upheld the philosophy and the business model that you set in the past?
Yes and no. I mean, you could have said the same thing of me about Danny, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I took what Danny gave me, made it my own and did my own, became my own director of poker. And then Joel's done the same thing, right? Now, in some regards, like particularly when you think of how strong the Aussie Millions brand is, but even that's not my brand, right? It's not even really Danny's brand. It's Keith Sloane's brand, Bendigo, right? So, I mean, if you want to go right back, like it's, right, this is the game that we all love, and this is why we love it, because we don't own it. Like Jack Effel doesn't own the World Series of Poker any more than Ty Stewart does, right? Mm-hmm. So they're just placeholders. They're just the current people in the game, right? But to touch on your point, look, I do have a little bit of understanding about what the WPT is doing, and which we'd pushed them to do for so long. Like I look at some of the stuff that's going on now and I just think, thank God, right? Like that's awesome with no attachment to it. As far as I'm concerned, I nurtured the game for a period of time and then handed it to the next generation to do that.
We absolutely have to get you back, Jonno, to talk stories. I think you just need to tell us stories from back in the day. I have a feeling there's multiple hours worth of stories to tell. Look, just quickly before we finish up though, I mean, you spoke before about, you know, you're in that poker headspace back in the day, you're doing 1,000 things at once. What about now? Are you just in a better space in general now, a bit more relaxed? And
well, look, mate, my life now, not so much for the last 6 or 7 weeks, right? Because it's been a little bit chaotic. I've actually got an injury that I've been healing as well. I tore a medial meniscus in my knee about 6 or 7 weeks, maybe 7 or 8 weeks ago. And it's been hit and miss. But for the last few years, my life has been, well, no, the chaos is still there because I still have that energy of wanting to do a whole bunch of things. But now it's more about legacy items, right? So I'm looking at how I can leave the world better than I found it, right? So for me, what that's meant is a lot of personal practices. So, in terms of a relaxed lifestyle, I'll get up at 5:45, 6 o'clock in the morning. I'll do yoga for an hour or so, cook the kids breakfast, get them off to school. I'll go and open the clinic. I'll treat some patients. I'll come home. I'll teach a martial arts class in my dojo at the back, and then I'll go back in. Maybe I'll treat some patients in the evening, or I'll cook dinner. Total difference to what my life was like, living and working in the busy casino environment, right? It's yin and yang. My life now is like, I'm all about, when we're trying to buy a farm, like that's our ultimate goal. The reason we moved up here is where my wife and I are building a wellness retreat, right? So, we'll buy a farm, the clinic will move out to the farm, we'll add in all the other practices and maybe have a place people can stay, maybe some tiny homes and all that sort of stuff. So that's what we're looking at doing long term. So my focus now is solely on that, right? So, I'm back studying again. I've enrolled in this master's in public health so I can maybe one day try and affect a bit of policy around the place, because the health policies in Australia need a bit of work, even though they're pretty good in terms of international standards. They're not as good as we could get them, right? And we could lead the world, because Australia's the best country in the world, right? I've had the privilege and pleasure to work in Europe, Asia, the Americas. The only place I haven't really been is deep into South America, right, in Africa. So, but most of the European cities, all that. So, and in a lot through Asia. So I've been fortunate enough, and I've had opportunities to live and work overseas, right? I had an opportunity to go to Macau. I also had an opportunity to work in Gibraltar. Both times I got flown over there and shown where I'd be living and where the kids would be going to school, right? So, and chose to live in Australia, chose to move my family out of the city and move to the bush, which I advise every single person to do, right? Quicker you can get some land about you and plant some seeds, the better off you're going to be, right? If this last 7 or 8 weeks hasn't shown you that, then you're not fucking paying attention, right? So, so that's sort of where I'm headed. That's where I want to be. Poker for me was a great experience in my 20s. I loved it. It taught me a lot, right? Because I'm a people person, it taught me a lot on how to read people. So, the skills I've picked up in poker that have helped me with life in general and have certainly helped me in the clinic. Like, patients can't lie to me in the clinic, it's impossible.
One more question before we wrap up. Of course, there obviously seems to still be that connection between poker and, of course, now the Chinese medicine business. Let's talk about, of course, you helping Brendan Ruby get through his most recent battle with COVID-19. Sure. Obviously, without going into too much, because I'm sure there's patient-doctor confidentiality there. Can you talk us through some of the methods that you use in order to treat
Sure.
Brendan's symptoms and things like that?
Yeah, look, I saw Brendan had posted on his Facebook page that he'd had COVID, right? And this is really early on. And I paid attention to it when it was a thing in China. I remember watching that hospital be built really quickly and was paying attention because I was reading a lot of case studies that were coming out in different research groups that I'm a part of. And they were interesting to me because Chinese medicine was being used effectively to treat the virus, right? And I was interested in the different way people were doing that, right? So when I was prepared, so it's funny, I said on a podcast earlier that, while other people were stockpiling dunny paper around Australia, I was stockpiling herbs to treat the disease, right? Because it looked at that stage like it was going to be pretty strong and big and everyone was going to get it at some point and it was going to come to our town. Now, if it did, we have an elderly population here that's at risk, right? So I wanted to be prepared, and also for myself and my family. So I wanted to be as prepared as I could. Now, this class of herbs that are used to treat this style of illness, right? Because we don't treat, Chinese medicine is different than the contemporary Western model, right? So we don't treat disease. We don't attack the disease, right? What we do is we treat the person. So, and that's not saying that Western medicine doesn't do that. It's just a different approach. So they're a microscopic medicine. They look down, they want to see under a microscope, isolate what it is and figure out antibodies and all that, right? What we look at is the macrocosm. We look at the person and go, how's the person responding to this? So what we look for are signs and symptoms, right? So we call them patterns of disharmony. Western medicine, translation might be syndrome. So if you think about SARS, which is, sudden acute respiratory syndrome, that's a syndrome, which is a group of symptoms together. Symptomology, a group of presenting signs, right? So when I had a chat with Brendan, he's okayed me to talk about all this, so that's fine. Because a lot of what I do isn't necessarily like straight medicine. A lot of it's holistic counselling too. So it's just lending an ear to someone a lot of the time, right? And just empathizing with him on a human level. Like that's how we started. I was talking to him about that. So what are you going through, mate? Like how long you been in isolation for, and tell me the process and all that. I kind of knew a little bit about how he'd contracted it because he'd already posted some videos. So I watched them. But also I wanted to hear it from him. And then he told me his symptoms. And his symptoms were, now, what you got to understand about COVID, I've stayed on top of a lot of cases, and its symptoms are very varied. Yeah. Yes, it attacks the respiratory system, absolutely, right? But it also does other things, yeah? And the body reacts, what we know in Chinese medicine, we look at how the body reacts to what we call external invasion. So in our medicine, this is an external pathogenic factor, like an external evil, they would call it, coming in, right? A pestilential qi is if you look at the really old texts, they knew enough to understand that it wasn't something internal that was deficient or excessive or whatever that was injuring the person. It was something outside trying to get in. So then, over a period of time, they noticed different signs and symptoms that the body would give out depending on the progression of the illness coming into the body. That's our theory on it, right? So where he was at, the level that he was at was where he was getting intermittent chills and fevers, right? So he'd get a little bit of a fever and a sweat, and then he'd get goosebumps. Yeah, and this was very subtle. It wasn't very strong for him. He didn't have very strong symptoms. And I said to him, look, you're a young dude. You're pretty fit. Like, be vigilant and obviously stay in touch with the hospital. Like, nothing I did was in place of what they were doing, right? I'll say that. But you're probably going to recover. I'll give you some things that might help. Yeah, it might help speed up that process. So he had the intermittent chills and fevers. He had some body aches. He lost his sense of smell. He didn't have the cough, phlegm, any of that, right? So in my mind, it hadn't fully attacked into his lung yet, right? So I was like, okay, so this is a positive thing. In my medicine, if I didn't know the COVID diagnosis that he had, if he just called me with those symptoms, I would have treated it exactly the same way. Right? I don't care about the label. What I care about is the person and their presenting signs and symptoms. And I treat that based on all the tools that I have in my disposal, right? So what I did was I gave him a combination of a fairly classic formula that a first-year graduate would know. He took that, and within a couple of days, his symptoms had turned around, right? Now, the skeptics out there might say his symptoms probably turned around anyway. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I certainly didn't do him any harm. Like I said, I've got to be careful with what I say because of the legislation that we're governed under. But what I will say is this. We treat the people that walk through the door as we find them. Yeah, and we ask a lot of questions because we want to know. We want to know, okay, so now with him, what you've got to understand is people think it's news around the world that sick people are dying from the coronavirus, right? So if you already have a pre-existing condition, you're more susceptible. They've just found out if you have obesity, you could be susceptible to dying of COVID, right? If you have obesity, you're susceptible to dying of a lot of things, right? Because you're unhealthy, right? So these aren't new things. So that should not be news to people, okay? So what we look at is, okay, so you've got this exterior pathogen trying to come in, right? This is Chinese medicine philosophy. So this exterior pathogen is going to come in. The strength of the interior will dictate whether or not that can come in, right? And how long it stays for and how it's processed out, yeah? And how the body eventually wins, okay? Or it doesn't. So what we try to do is help people maintain the best versions of themselves to stay away from this stuff, to keep this stuff at bay. So if you're walking around, you're strong and now not that every strong person walk around if it's not going to get COVID, right? Because that's just not true. You're still going to get sick to a point. If it's not COVID, something else, whatever. But if you give yourself every opportunity to be your best version, you'll have every opportunity to fight anything that comes in, right? So my hope for humanity is that rather than, search for a specific antigen and rather than take the microscopic approach of global vaccination, ultimately, right, is what it is. No, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. All my kids have had their vaccinations and everything. I'm not going to go down that path, right? But what I will say is it's not really the answer anyway. Because let's say, and I've got a patient who very eloquently puts it, because he's elderly and his GP's wanting to take the flu shot. And he says, well, have you got a shot for this year's flu? Sounds like you've only got last year's flu. If you get one for this year's, let me know and I'll take it, right? And he's having a laugh, but it's actually not a bad point, right? Because if you look at it, so let's say, okay, so they do find a vaccine for this virus. And even then, is it guaranteed that it's going to be safe and all that, right? There's all those things to consider and people should have their own experience with all the information that's out there, but verify your sources, yeah? But if it's not that virus or the next virus or whatever else, rather than that, I hope people take a macroscopic approach and go, okay, so, which is this is what I did, right? So as soon as this thing started to become a thing, now I'm immunosuppressed, so I'm firmly in the risk category for COVID, right? So that's part of the reason I stayed on top of it, because it looked like it was fairly virulent. And I go, okay, what can I do? Right. I need more vitamin C, right? Number one. Echinacea is a good one. And I need to sleep more, eat better, get some sun, do all these things that I know, right? So these are the things that I did for myself, right? When all this came about, I started propping up my kids with a little bit of extra vitamin C. You know, we started having lots of soups. I'd put some tonic herbs in there and things like that, right? So because food is always your best medicine. And in Chinese medicine terms, acupuncture is a very strong medicine in our terms. So, you know, our classic state, if someone walks in and they're in distress and, you know, at first you try and address the diet. You know, let's see if we can make some change for the person there. If they come back in a couple of days after making these changes and they're still like that, then maybe you need to give them a bowl of herbal soup, or maybe you warm up a point, you know. And then if they're still in distress, well, maybe you're going to have to penetrate the skin with some acupuncture, right? Yeah, so back to Brendan. I sent him some herbs for that, and then we just kept in constant contact, touching base every day, seeing how he was. Because with herbal medicine, we want to stay in contact with the person, right? So we're actually legislated to follow up with them. So if I prescribe, this is why we are registered, right? So that's what this certificate here is, my registration, right? So being a registered prac, like I follow up. If I prescribe you herbs, I'm going to follow up. I want to see what happened, right? Did they help? Did they hurt? You know, because I certainly don't want to hurt you. That's the last thing I want to do, right? We touch base that way. So I kept touching base with him, and then I sent him another package that had some more herbs in it, gave him a kit to do some moxibustion, and because now he was on the other side of it, thankfully his symptoms turned around and they cleared him, and, you know, he was good to go back to his life. And then it became, okay, so that really made him have a look at himself and go, okay, so, because we had a lot of conversations about what his life was like before that, because I wanted to know what his constitution was leading into the illness, right? And then he was able to make some dietary changes coming out of it. And I gave him a different formula that would help after the illness. Because we prescribe different, if you come today, I would prescribe different than you come next week, because you present differently, particularly if you're recovering from an illness.
I guess the one thing to take away from this, it's important now more than ever, even if you aren't obviously sick with COVID-19 or influenza or whatever. I think if anything, this lockdown gives us all an opportunity to focus on improving our health and well-being, and hopefully we all come out on the other side of all this, you know, much better versions of ourselves, which I think is going to be really important, especially as we start getting back into live poker, because there are so many inherent health risks when it comes to being in such a confined environment, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Look, I hope, my hope for the world, and I'm an optimist, right? So, I mean, I firmly believe this. This isn't something that I hope for. When I say I hope, I do hope, but I also believe that the world is ascending. I don't think the world is descending, right? So in terms of consciousness, yeah? So we're much more aware. My kids are much more self-aware than I was at 11 and 12, right? Miles ahead. The language that they have to express themselves and what they're feeling and all that is just light years away from what I had, right? So I have a lot of hope and faith in the future. And I think this sort of global shutdown really is what it is, has given everybody that opportunity. Now, there's realities of living in this world that we live in, right? We all build, you know, I closed the clinic and turned off the tap of money that was coming into my house, right? So we've been eating into savings and, you know, doing all that. Like everybody around Australia has. I am not unique in that regard, right? Now, I reopened the clinic this morning and I'm seeing a few patients a day, you know, with lots of increased infection control protocols that had to be put in place and all that sort of stuff. It's like, you know, and if I'm honest, I'm opening the clinic for my patients, not for me, because I am quite happy at home with my kids and they're homeschooling and I'm cooking. I'm at my best when I'm relaxed cooking in the kitchen and doing that, right? So, you know, it's a small town. I run into patients on the street. They message me. Like, my daughters hate coming to the shops with me because I have to stop in every aisle, right? Which is great. That's why I love this community. And, you know, they've embraced my family with open arms over the last 5 years since we've been here, right? But, you know, I treat a lot of people that are in pain, mate. And, you know, 6 or 8 weeks or whatever it is without treatment is a long time for some of them. So I reopened just for existing patients on treatment plans so that I can get them back in the door and get them some treatment, right? Yeah, look, that'll bring some money back in. So that's a positive thing, but it's not the driving force behind me doing it, right? I have faith in the overall humanity, right? My faith for the individuals that are alive in this current time frame is that they come out of this with a more present way of living, right? So rather than be so caught up in the rat race treadmill, you know, I think people have been forced to realize, whoa, shit, you know, especially with some of the stuff that you're seeing and some of the little docos that you see. And, you know, you can gauge a lot about people by what's on their social media feeds, right? By what people are thinking about. So some of these things that were quite underground concepts, you know, 5 or 10 years ago when I was researching them, are now quite mainstream things, right? So, which is good, because people need to question everything. You know, like what's the old saying? Sort of trust but verify. Like you want to, it's getting harder and harder to trust the media now. Like that's been a big thing, but even that's not a new secret, right? But more and more people are waking up to that, right? So that gives me hope, that side of it. The fact that these systems are still in place, they are what they are, right? And it's going to take a period of change and time and adjustment to do that. I mean, you can't just, I don't know what it looks like when you just rip all these systems out all at the same time, right? And, you know, who knows? If it does, you know, I live in rural Australia, so I'm fairly well protected geographically from a lot of these mishaps, you know, and that's not an accident. But all you can do really is try to be the best person you can be and try and make those people around you better versions of themselves, right? So I like to think that's what I did when I was in the casino business for the people that were in my team and closest to me, is that I brought out the best in them. You know, I'd take them to meetings that they probably shouldn't have been in, and I'd ask for their feedback. And if they had an idea and I was in that meeting with them, I'd present the idea and tell them that it was their idea. I never took credit for any of that, you know, because my theory was a high tide floats all boats, right? So if I'm doing well and I can help them do well and their careers flourish and we're all in this together and we all go up together, right? And that's the same thing in terms of the vibrational frequency that we're all on at the moment. Just like the poker room has a hum, you know, Instagram has a hum, you know, depending on which feed you're tuning into, right? So, you know, I do a lot of nutritional cleanses with my patients. People need to do a digital cleanse. You know, if you scrolling through your feed and you look at it and you go, and that makes you feel a certain way, ditch that person, right? Ruthlessly eliminate them from your life. They're not doing you any good. And all they're going to do, someone's energy is a zero-sum game, okay? If they're taking energy from you, it's gone, yeah? So you need to figure that out, cut them off and keep it for yourself.
Good advice, Jonno.
Good advice indeed. I tell you what, Ben, I think we need to get Jonno back on at some stage. But for now, it's time for us to wrap this up. So from all of us here, Ben Blashki and Jonno Pittock, this is Landon Blackwell signing off for PMA. We'll see you soon. Bye for now. As you can tell, this is a quasi office / playroom workspace. So
it's good, mate. Keep it natural.
The Elsa karaoke machine behind me.
My daughters are 11 and 12.
Yeah.
Like, I lived through the first Frozen. Thank God they didn't catch on to the second one, but I'm feeling your pain. It seemed like with Frozen 2, they were trying too hard. Like, they were trying to make the song stick like they did in Frozen 1.
Thank you.
But,
I'm not the only one that shares that same opinion. So it just felt like a sequel that just didn't need to be
forced.
It was forced. Frozen was actually such a good movie. Like, in terms of the musicality, in terms of the storyline.
Storyline was great, yeah.
It was executed so well. Like,
you just need to let it go.
Let it go, mate. Let it go.